Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfect.
Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
So it's great to see some of you again. I don't see you yet, but I'm sure there are some from the Marseille course that we had. And also hello to and warm welcome to all participants that I did not meet yet. So it's good to have this course, and I will start with sharing my slides and give you an outline of the following course and presentation. Just a second. You should see it now. Yes. All right. So the topic of today is evaluation methodologies for biodiversity investments. I am, as Christine introduced me, from the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, UFZ in Leipzig. I'm also lead for nature at the Value Balancing Alliance in Frankfurt, which is focusing on impact accounting and valuation. And yeah, I'm going to share some insights from my work related also to the topic of today. And yeah, as you have probably seen already, those that participated in the meeting in Marseille, you have seen that graph before. What is important about nature is the perspective of double materiality, meaning we are looking at the interaction with nature in terms of how activities of economic or economic activities of sectors impact nature. So that's on the left side. And at the same time, we also depend on nature and the ecosystem services they provide. So as you can see, the European Central Bank estimates that about 72% of European businesses are dependent on nature, at least on one ecosystem service. And yeah, in that regard, also 75% of corporate loans are dependent on nature. So that means basically these loans are, of course, also investments into companies, into projects. And that means also a large part of the investments are depending on nature. So it's very clear that we need to account for that. I will not go too much into detail of the presentations we had earlier on assessing impacts and dependencies and the TNFD approach, so the LEAP approach of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. So you'll find from the earlier presentations more information on these frameworks. Here I will go more into detail on the following topics. So on the one hand, we want to invest into nature for enhancing ecosystem services, so the benefits we gain from nature. And on the other hand, that's the second part, we want to invest in the mitigation of impacts on nature. So investing into options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or water pollutants, for example. And so these are the two big topics I will focus on. And in the third part, I will have a short investment case to highlight some of the aspects that we have been looking at before. And in the first part, so investing in nature for enhancing ecosystem services, I think it's critical to understand also why we invest into nature. So it's not happening, a project or an investment is not happening just isolated in itself, but usually it is an investment into an activity that's at a landscape level, interacting with people, so and other sectors. So I'm presenting the theory of change to highlight this interaction a bit. Landscape, also highlighting landscape approach. Then I will go into a bit more detail of measuring and valuing ecosystem services. Also the aspect of multiple values of ecosystem services or the multiple values of nature. Then multi-criteria analysis to integrate different aspects, different values of nature into decision making, and then going more towards cost benefit analysis and discounting. So that's the first part. And then in the second part, investing in the mitigation of impacts on nature. So there I will highlight impact accounting and valuation, and also highlight that there are value factors for impact drivers available that can be used for decision making, and also the topic of baselines and targets. If you have any questions on these topics while I'm presenting, please feel free to either uh, raise your hand or ask the questions in the chat. I will not see the chat, but Christine will flag anything that we should discuss immediately. So you have both options. You can raise your hand or yeah, write in the chat. Okay, so again, is this topic of double materiality, I think, is quite critical to keep it in mind as a concept. On the left side, you see the impacts we can reduce. For example, to invest into alternative use of resources or establish circularity, to invest into options that allow for cost savings, enhance efficiency, and shifting the business model. So this is where impact accounting can help. And on the right side, you see options to investing into nature that allow for enhancing ecosystem services. So, for example, flood risk management, uh, or enhancing water quality, carbon sequestration, and other sustainable production. So in that regard, we always have this in mind now, these different directions of where investments can target. But of course, in many cases, if you look at landscapes and the management of landscapes, often you have both at the same time. On the one hand, you want to enhance the sustainable management of ecosystems and thereby enhance ecosystem services through nature-based solutions. And while doing so, you are also reducing the impacts on nature. So it's often those different directions are interlinked. What are the possible benefits from investing in nature? Of course, we, on the one hand, want to conserve ecosystems and create multiple values from this. So basically, also conserving nature by itself. So, for example, yeah, you get investments into protected areas from various sources because of different motivations. Um, but of course, you get also investments into risk reductions. So you want to reduce physical risks. So, for example, from water shortages or the impact of extreme weather events, you want to reduce those risks through nature-based solutions, for example. But you also want to reduce perhaps transition risks. So if a company is polluting a river, then this could have implications for the license to operate. And then the company would invest into water treatment, for example, and yeah, to mitigate transition risks. When doing such investments, you can generate cost savings, you enhance efficiency. Sometimes, or quite often, also it has been shown that nature-based solutions are more effective in controlling extreme events, flood events, in ecosystem-based adaptation strategies, for example, and also in the topic of green-blue infrastructure combined, for example, sponge cities, which can take up water with the green areas in a more effective way. Then you can, of course, also generate revenue opportunities. So by investing into ecosystem management, such as forestry, sustainable forest management, ecotourism, renewable energies, or also forest products for carbon credits. So these are different ways of making use of ecosystem service provision. And then, of course, this can also add uh, value to or reputation and brand value. So customers' relation in that regard can also be leveraged. And then, of course, you can have also benefits in terms of compliance with laws and regulations, which help you to access markets around the globe. So, for example, if you want to, if you want to invest into a production site for rubber plantations, for example, or other commodities, and you want to export those commodities to the EU, then there are now soon coming regulations that this should be deforestation free. So it could be then mean that the production side and the supply chain would have to switch to more sustainable operations with no deforestation involved. Um, and that, of course, involves also investments into these alternative management options. And then what is critical for nature, we have also long-term resilience that we can enhance. So also, for example, cities could invest or do invest into green areas also for the long-term benefit of the citizens, or also in flood management, you would want to invest into the conservation of riverbeds, ecosystems, as a long-term strategy for flood mitigation. So this is just an overview of a range of options. What is always critical in that regard is, of course, if you invest, you want to know what you get in return. So then measuring the benefits from ecosystems and the services they provide is often critical. In that regard, measuring can mean different things. I will show this later on. Um, it's just that, of course, you want to know if there's an improvement from you to the investment. Sometimes you get also investments where, for example, in a protected area, um, that are linked also with a strong motivation for the existence value of biodiversity, so to maintain the ecosystems intact. So there you would have measurements to show whether the protected area is actually doing the job of protecting the ecosystems. And when it comes to nature-based solutions, of course, there you want to show what is the solution part of it. So what, how does it help to mitigate carbon emissions or to reduce floods? In the terms of theory of change, this is showing that on the one hand, we have a global overarching vision with the Rio Conventions on, related to climate, but also to biodiversity. So there we have in these conventions a set of targets that outline the vision, for example, living in harmony with nature. And this is a bold vision and a broad vision, but this needs to, of course, to be broken down into concrete um, solutions at a site level. So moving from the left, from the global to the right, that this theory of change should then work also at the local level. So, for example, you get also initiatives translating these targets to the national scale with the national determined contributions to the climate goals, but also the NBS, the National Biodiversity Strategies. And then in the end, of course, this means if we want to achieve those targets, the change will have to happen on the ground in specific cases of ecosystem management and investing in those projects. Then this is a more detailed view of the theory of change. You identify the land use issues. One in the second step, prioritizing the issues that need to be addressed. Establish also the link of the causes and the effects. So your intervention that you're investing in should actually also address the problem or support the solution. Also, of course, you want to have a vision of how the future should look like with undertaking this investment, setting goals and how to get there, the pathways. And then, of course, throughout this whole process, stakeholders play a role to be involved in the consultations, how the project should be designed to deliver the desired benefits. And this is, of course, ideally a process of co-design that helps to the investment to be also sustainable, not only from the biophysical aspect of biodiversity, but also from the socioeconomic aspects of the people and the stakeholders involved. So this is critical also for the long-term success of investments. And this is an example how this can look like. On the left, identifying key impact drivers that contribute to a problem or an issue, and then um, these have implications for biodiversity loss, soil erosion, water security, potential conflicts over resource use, and yeah, it would it is quite important to understand where the investment in this case would uh, what it would address, how it would address the underlying impact drivers, and how this would then also be able to be monitored, to be measured, whether this investment strategy is successful. It could involve also investing, for example, into better forest governance, not just into forest management practices, but also into governance practices. So an investment would have to address different aspects from the very practical management aspects up to very policy governance oriented aspects. And as mentioned, the landscape approach and stakeholder engagement is often critical for the success of nature investments. Um, as you can see, different activities happen across the landscape at different scales and in different locations. Sometimes they um, yeah, coexist. Other times there are of course trade-offs that need to be managed at the landscape level, and that would be also have to be addressed when investing into a specific site to see how the interactions across the landscape play out. So if you would be, for example, situated at the lower end of the watershed near the coast and you are impacted from activities further upstream, this would have to be, of course, to be integrated into the investment strategy. In the end, it's also a question, it's how is the investment case, or for whom is it actually an investment case? Um, Usually there is the assumption someone is investing and is expecting something in return. And but to make it for making that work, it's also critical to see how the benefits flow. Is it benefiting those that are stewards of the environment, providing ecosystem services, so local land users, for example, local communities that contribute to maintaining ecosystems? Is it benefiting maybe even the polluter or that is degrading the ecosystem? So does it have harmful effects? These kind of questions need to be addressed in order to understand how the ecosystem services provide benefits to the different stakeholders and how they should actually be engaged in the investment strategy and how the benefits from the investments should be also distributed for ensuring the long-term effectiveness of the intervention of the investment. And often this requires a mix of policies, a mix of instruments, not just economic instruments, not just the pure financial investment vehicle, but also, as I mentioned before, governance topics, how this is structured, how different stakeholders are involved is critical. I'm sure you are aware with the benefits of green infrastructure, just to outline them here, that we can think of it as yeah, nicely along watersheds, for example. But of course, this perspective can also work for other ecosystems. And what's typical that it's often interconnected and that these benefits are multiple across the landscape, coexisting at the same time in the same place. Um, so any intervention, any investment would have to take into account these multiple ecosystem services and also to take into account possible synergies and trade-offs. There's another perspective on the watershed and just highlighting how different land uses could negatively affect the watershed, how it can also have knock-on effects from the terrestrial to the marine environment, and different users interacting at different scales. In this case, we actually worked in a project in Micronesia, where we assessed the different ecosystem services from a ridge to reef approach, and yeah, just highlighting the cascading effects and also introducing these little icons for ecosystem services, which you will see also later on in the presentation. So you can see habitat services higher up that provide erosion control, flood control, also water regulation services, and also touristic values or coastal protection, for example. And of course, it's also a question of what does the investment target? What kind of activities does it target? Do the activities actually help to improve the ecosystem services that you want to maintain? And this is just an overview, sorry, how different watershed services on the left are linked to different watershed management strategies on the right. And as you can see, they also interact. So you can have certain strategies, activities in place that contribute to multiple ecosystem services. And of course, you want to have this functioning uh, efficiently and effectively. So it's also a question of, does the activity that is financed and that is invested in actually effect, does it effectively deliver the desired outcomes? Now, measuring ecosystem services, there are multiple ways. Um, so, for example, you can have field monitoring, where you go directly into the field and measure the water quality, soil carbon, or the biomass. You can also use on remote sensing data for the tracking the coverage of ecosystems, for example, or integrate ecological modeling or hydrological modeling, looking at water cycling, nutrient cycling. Um, Hydrological modeling is, for example, also relevant when it comes to assessing potential benefits for flood regulation. Indicators that can help to track ecosystem services are, of course, for provisioning services, the direct use of crops, of fish stocks, of water, for example, but of course in forestry, for example, the direct use of the wood. Regulating services can be, for example, carbon sequestration or flow regulation of waters. Um, Supporting services is something that's different across the different classifications of ecosystem services. Sometimes they call it supporting services, or sometimes they include it into this regulating services. But this can be pollination, for example, or species population contributing to the maintenance of ecosystems and the services. And then we have, of course, cultural services such as people visiting sites that are of landscape beauty. And yeah, the strength is that if you have direct measurements, then this is scientifically um, robust. But of course, direct data is often also not that easy to get in some cases for some of the ecosystem services. And that's why proxies are often taken into account so that, for example, if you measure the forest area with remote sensing, that would be a proxy if you combine it with knowledge on average carbon content of that forest. You could do carbon accounting for a particular area, for particular ecosystems, or if you know if how much the yield is for a certain crop that is dependent on pollination, then this yield could give you an indication how well pollination is doing in that area. Or for cultural services, one could look into um, the number of visitors. Maybe not all of the visitors are coming because of uh, the cultural value. Others might come for other reasons to take out some resources maybe from a site. But in general, you could use this as an indicator, even though people might have different motivations. And yeah, so this can get very sophisticated. So you can have landscape level GIS analysis together with hydrological models that help you to specifically address and model and track and monitor how ecosystem management relates to the provision of certain ecosystem services and how this is then also changing over time. Recently, the Nature Positive Initiative has highlighted or is piloting state of nature metrics. The goal here is to have a set of metrics that can be used by different sectors in order to make it easier and more comparable to assess the state of nature, meaning the extent and condition of ecosystems. One part of using these kind of measures is for reporting purposes. But one can also use this, for example, financial institutions can use this to track, for example, how investments or portfolios are doing in terms of their impacts and dependencies on nature. Um, and yeah, these are the different categories that are included in this set of state of nature metrics. They are currently being piloted, and early next year, the experiences will be published or reported. How well the set of metrics that have been identified are useful for tracking the ecosystem extent and conditions, but also the link to species at risk. And of course, um, it's case on a case-to-case basis. One metric might be more useful than another metric, and of course, it can become highly specific depending on the particular investment case, which metric will actually be helpful for you. So the whole range of different ecosystem services offers, of course, a whole range of different metrics that could be tracked, and also the combination of how easy it is to track a metric or what resources are available to track a metric will also have, of course, an influence on what is chosen to be relevant for a particular investment case. This is just an overview of the metrics. So, for example, the change in the extent of an ecosystem can be the most basic metric, or also, what's the contribution of the different habitat types to a particular area, is that changing? Then the particular conditions of the ecosystem. So for example, connectivity across the landscape is often quite important from a ecological perspective. So if you have ecosystems that are connected across the landscapes, usually they do better in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem services, as if they are islands within a larger monocultural landscape, for example. Then with species, of course, it's important to know whether there are any species that are under threat in a particular area, and how this relates also to your investment case. So if it's a nature-based solution that focuses primarily on water regulation, then that should be, of course, the key metric that should be targeted. But you could show a range of co-benefits as well that this has and provides. And these co-benefits would be also maybe important for making the case for the investment, because other stakeholders might be interested in other indicators or other benefits from that ecosystem service or that particular investment type. This highlights the link of these metrics to the different CBD targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF. So on the left in the table, you see the indicator, ecosystem extent, then the different also condition indicators and species indicators. And on the right, you see the different targets of the GBF, how they would help to track progress towards these targets. And as mentioned earlier, of course, each investment or each site contributes to a bigger target at national scale, for example, and this can contribute then to the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework targets. I'm not going to go too much into detail of the system of environmental economic accounting, but this is a system that is established and has been adopted by around 100 states for doing ecosystem accounting at a national level. And for example, Germany is having already an ecosystem atlas at national scale, following this guidelines of the system of environmental economic accounting. It's under the UN, United Nations Statistical Division, a framework that really provides detailed guidance on how to assess ecosystem extent and conditions, how to assess ecosystem service flow, and even provides guidance on ecosystem service evaluation. So the lower part is the monetary evaluation part, following some particular, for example, market-based valuation techniques that follow the logic of national accounts. Now, while this is certainly helpful for an investment case, it's still not like there is a difference between doing economic valuation based on the tracking of some indicators of ecosystem services that you require or need for your investment case and an ecosystem accounting. So in the accounting case, you try to cover the entire extent of ecosystems and their services for a particular region. For example, for like can be at national scale, it can be at subnational scale, can be also for land owned by a forest company. They can also do an ecosystem accounting. So basically taking stock of what is there. Often for the investment into in connected to nature-based solutions, the solution part is often more the flow of ecosystem services. So you want to gain a flow of benefits from that investment. So here is kind of like either you invest into an asset or you invest into a flow. And this where can help this um, analogy to the asset and flow uh, as you would invest, for example, into an construction as an asset. Um, Here, that could apply to investing into a forest as an asset and then gaining the ecosystem services as a flow. Um, but these guidance are, of course, officially adopted now, and they can serve as a good source of looking further into what kind of indicators to choose. And then, of course, when looking at ecosystem services, we have to keep in mind that there are multiple ecosystem services and they are coming in bundles. It's often not just one ecosystem service, but provided by an ecosystem, but multiple. And on the right side, you see more on the upper right, those provisioning services that could be translated into cash flows. So if you are producing foods, materials, those can be sold on the market. Then regulating services, some of them, like with carbon credits, you can directly, like you have in some cases, a carbon market, so you can also have a cash flow there. But often the flow of ecosystem services is not directly already translated into a monetary benefit. And then if you're on the left side, you see yeah, aesthetic values, spiritual values, recreation values, mental and physical health. This is a bit more difficult to monetize and but still can be critical for the investment case, for making the case for an investment. If you think of, for example, green areas in the city, they can have multiple benefits, not even in the direct provision of materials, but actually more on the recreational and mental and physical health side. And even though it might be tricky to assess the cash flow of those sites, there's still a strong investment case to make why it's wise to have to invest into green areas in the city. And yeah, with the regulating or the underlying um, foundation of like photosynthesis and soil formation and nutrient cycling, these processes are critical for maintaining ecosystems and the provision of ecosystem services, but they are often overlooked. But of course, they should be also maintained if you want to have a long-term benefit from ecosystems. Now, how to value those ecosystem services? There's the concept of total economic value. Um, and as you can see, we have on the left the use value that is directly linked to some of the ecosystem services that I mentioned earlier. Even if you go and enjoy and running in the green space of a city, then that's also a use value that you have there. It's non-consumptive. The consumptive use value or consumptive value would be if you directly take resources from an ecosystem. Indirect use values are things like pest control, pollination. It's not that you directly benefit in the sense that the bee brings the honey onto your sandwich, but it's collected in the beehive and then harvested, and then with the after the harvesting, that kind of it becomes a direct use value then. And then, of course, option values. Maybe there are some benefits, for example, from plants for medicines that we don't know yet. So these are option values that lie in the future. Um, and then we have a range of so-called non-use values, although that's also a bit misleading. So philanthropic values and altruism related to biodiversity can be also of a direct benefit for people. Um, and also the existence value that, for example, you know that a species is there, um, can also be enough to have an investment case that people are willing to invest into a protected area. And bequest value is linked to future generations. A lot of activities why we are concerned about sustainability and why we're concerned about biodiversity actually relates to that value. The question, how future generations will uh, have to deal with the biodiversity loss or with the lost biodiversity, or with ongoing climate change. And then we have also altruist values. So knowing that other people benefit from nature can also be motivation for investing into nature. Now, this concept can help to develop scenarios around, yeah, what's the current benefit from an area and what are future strategies and how they can help to preserve. Also, it can help to inform cost-benefit analysis, and also highlight, yeah, hidden economic values of nature that have not been taken into account so far. So a standard investment case might look only at the raw materials that can be taken from an area. But now, since we have been going through all the different ecosystem services at landscape scale and um, know that they can be multiple and also provide different benefits for different users, um, these kind of approaches can help to open up the debate, integrate multiple values into decision making, and also justify why conservation might actually be also on economic terms a more sensible way to invest into nature. Now, I said earlier I will not touch TNFD, but this will be the only slide I refer to TNFD because here highlighting the financial effects. So when addressing nature-related risks and also impact mitigation, and also nature-related opportunities, uh, this can help or what I've been referring to earlier, can help to establish the financial effects of risks and opportunities. And later on, I will also highlight impact accounting and valuation. So that can also help you to establish information on the financial effects. Now, going a bit more in detail into economic valuation of ecosystem services. Um, so, as mentioned earlier, resources can be traded on the market, so you can take market prices for those. Also, crop production, for example, can be linked to pollination, and by this, when you know the market value of the crop, you can take that as an indication for what's the minimum value of that pollination service. You can also take a damage cost approach. So if a certain ecosystem services is lost, what is the damage of this? Also the replacement cost, meaning, for example, if you have a wetland that is providing water treatment service in terms of water quality, and enhancing that water quality, one could make a theoretical calculation on what would be needed in terms of a water treatment plant to replace that ecosystem, and that would be the minimum amount that would have to be invested if that watershed is being lost. Then we have revealed preference methods. So, for example, properties values change depending on their location, of course. And in many places, we see in cities that places or houses near green spaces within densely populated areas, of course, are often higher priced. Also, if there is a lake nearby, then the price might rise even further if you're closer to the lake. Then we can also look at travel cost methods, meaning that if people are willing to travel to see a protected area, sometimes, driving in the car for hours or on train, some even take long distance flights just to visit a protected area, then this travel cost method can be used to give an estimate how do these people appreciate being able to see that particular ecosystem in the particular site. And then stated preference methods is basically willingness to pay. So this can be done via questionnaires. How much is someone willing to contribute to the existence of an ecosystem, benefiting from an ecosystem services, for example. And in choice experiments, this can be done in a bit more complex way um, to better understand the underlying motivations of why people prefer certain elements of biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services. Now, this is the Economic Valuation Database, ESVD. It's a global database where currently already more than 12,000 values of ecosystem services are being recorded. They are based on more than 1,000 studies that assess the value of ecosystem services for particular sites around the globe. And what is unique in that database is, first of all, that it collects that many ecosystem service valuation studies from all over the world, but also that it's really done in a consistent way that you can track the value back to the methodology that has been used to generate that value, also to the particular ecosystem type, and of course the particular ecosystem service that has been valued, and also specifications on the method that has been used to establish that value, the underlying biophysical indicators. And why is this important? Of course, an ecosystem service evaluation study itself can be quite expensive. So not for each and every decision-making process, it would be wise to do a primary study on ecosystem services and their values. So then it could be useful to look into other studies that have been done in a similar area, on a similar topic, on a similar ecosystem type. And if there is such a study available, then this can give an indication for your investment case if a similar valuation might be could occur also at your site. And this is called benefit transfer. So from a scientific point of view, one has to control, of course, for several factors going into evaluation. And when controlling for those, the benefit transfer method can be applied in a quite stringent way. And this allows to give an approximation of how, for a site where no study has been done, the ecosystem service value could look like based on already existing studies. Now, what's the use of economic value? Yes, not every economic value or valuation study is useful in a similar way, meaning that values are plural, they are pluralistic values, meaning spiritual values, relate more to convictions and beliefs, which is not always useful to turn this into monetary values, whereas maybe commodity type values of ecosystems, such as trading wood, is more, easy to establish a value based on market information. So there's this kind of trade-off in using monetary valuation for ecosystem services. So these commodity type values are more easy to establish monetary values for. Something like pollination, carbon sequestration, water filtration, touristic and recreational value. Those require some assumptions already behind the valuation, and something like spiritual values, the existence values of species, or also option values, that possible information on this DNA in this on of certain plants could hold knowledge that don't know yet. This is more difficult to grasp, and it's also um, yeah, also a question of ethics and culture, whether one would like to put in monetary value on those um, more belief-based ecosystem services, or values of ecosystem services. So there are different level of analysis of ecosystem services. So we have the known and the unknown ecosystem services. We can do qualitative reviews. So, for example, what's the use in terms of health and well-being? We can do quantitative reviews. So the number of people using fuel wood from a forest, for example. So this can be quantified in numbers, and then only a fraction of this makes sense also to transfer into monetary values. So for example, the avoided cost for water purification or recreational value. And this is important to keep in mind, that when we work with monetary valuation, also in an investment case, and we look at a cost-benefit analysis, the type of information that is included in monetary terms and financial terms is usually the tip of the iceberg, and a lot of information that might not be available, is not really no data available, just known on qualitative terms, or um, is not being assessed, usually it can be quite vast. Um, so this should be kept in mind, that when taking decisions on investment decisions on biodiversity, then it's the numbers, in economic terms, of course, play an important role, but are not the only information that is available. So here you see the different ecosystem service types according to where they are situated in this uh, reversed pyramid. So then we can have, of course, multi-criteria analysis that helps to bring these different types of information together. One can combine biophysical indicators with economic values and socio-cultural values. One would, of course, for example, have to agree on a certain score, a certain weight, which would be, for example, could be negotiated in a deliberative process involving different stakeholder groups, and could inform like a trade-off analysis, whether a certain alternative is more suitable than another. Of course, this involves a certain subjectivity in the scoring and weighing. And of course, the results are sensitive to the methodological choices that are underlying these different assumptions. But this is also true for monetary valuation. Although monetary values and numbers often come across as fact-based, like monetary valuation often involves, of course, assumptions. And if you change these assumptions, also the monetary value would change. Just think of which carbon price to choose for valuing the carbon sequestration value of a forest. And do you take a carbon price of the voluntary carbon market, which is maybe between 5 and 10 US dollars, or do you take the damage cost approach with the social cost of carbon between 240 and 300 US dollars, meaning the damage cost that 1 ton of CO2 causes to the world being emitted into the atmosphere with all the knock-on effects that it has. So the assumption here makes a huge difference in the price that you get in the end. And these assumptions, of course, will also have an implication of whether on the financial analysis of your investment case. Just an example from my own work where we did a feasibility assessment of carbon dioxide removal options for Germany that included also bio-based, biomass-based, and ecosystem-based options for the uptake of CO2 from the atmosphere and then storage of that carbon in the soil. As you see on the left side, we developed this kind of multi-criteria analysis approach, which included also, of course, economic indicators. And yeah, we were quite lucky because when we published it in early 2022, shortly after, the German Energy Agency was actually working on a national strategy for carbon dioxide removal, and they found our analysis very useful for that purpose. So they directly integrated this system into the national strategy for carbon dioxide removal and is now being serving as a guidance for assessing the suitability of carbon dioxide removal options within the national strategy of Germany. Now, also when looking at these different value types, some of those values are quite broad, but it's good to recognize them. And others are quite specific and they can be captured, meaning, for example, in market based options or market options. And for recognizing a certain value, legislation can be helpful, or regional plans. So spatial planning can be helpful to designate areas that are of certain importance. Then we can have also certification schemes that help you to highlight a value of a certain product. So maybe you want to highlight that a product is particularly sustainable produced, then you can apply for a certain certification scheme to show that. And then capturing the value of ecosystems, for example, in a PES scheme, so a payment for ecosystem service scheme, that's then directly targeting at capturing the values of those ecosystem services, meaning it's directly relevant for decision making of the actors in that PES scheme. And we have different instruments. We have norms and regulations to address the legislation part, the regional and spatial planning part. We have economic mechanisms that can include certification as for carbon, for example. But we can have also markets for ecosystem services as we have for food and resources, but also for payments for ecosystem services. And investments into nature can be justified for all these levels. So even for legislative purposes, you might want to invest into safeguarding a certain ecosystem in your site because either you're required by law or you really have an issue if you impact it negatively, then you should invest into mitigating these impacts. And this is linked to the transition risks. Then, for example, sustainable agroforest schemes that are directly targeting the production within agroforests. There you would try to focus more on the certification and market schemes that would help you to establish that system in an hopefully economic sustainable way as well. Now coming to cost benefit analysis. As you can see, this is an example of nature-based infrastructure investment. There's a gray built infrastructure that has basically no ecosystem services. But then if you compare it with a wetland and nature-based infrastructure, then you have multiple co-benefits, and which you see on the right. And each of those ecosystem services you can assign different values to, and can be assessed, yeah, in biophysical terms, in also yeah, monetary terms, also in terms of perhaps scores of how valuable it is to certain stakeholder groups. But what you can see is that when accounting for these different ecosystem services, the cost-benefit analysis, of course, is opening up to different benefits that should be accounted for. And what has been found, for example, on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions is that looking at the example of nature-based solutions addressing natural hazard, or not only natural hazards in general, it was found that 65% of those NBS options are more effective than the engineered options. And if you take into account that there are also actually often also combined solutions, so green, gray infrastructure combined, engineered solutions with nature-based solutions integrated, can be also highly effective. And the study shows that in particular for flood events, for storm events, erosion events, also in terms of pollution and landslides, these kind of nature-based solutions have been shown to work really well, in particular also in coastal regions, wetlands, forests, mangroves, also in urban regions, riparian areas, meaning near river sites. For agroecosystems, it seems a bit lower, but I think there's still potential to look at this in a more broader perspective, because here the study was on actually hazards, and it doesn't mean it didn't look, for example, in regenerative agriculture and the potential for more resilient production systems, but here it was really on mitigating hazards. And when doing a cost-benefit analysis, this is the case for peatland restoration in Indonesia. One can compare the business as usual scenario with different activities that could be invested in. So you see on the top of the table different management strategies, and there are benefits to avoiding carbon emissions or avoiding flood or avoiding forest fires, generating household incomes, also, yeah, different costs in terms of interventions that are required, and also maybe some foregone revenue from, in this case, palm oil production. And as you can see, overall, the option involving multiple strategies, addressing different benefits that can be generated, pairs best. So on the very right. So if you do peatland restoration, then you get different benefits also in terms of flood mitigation, and also in terms of reduced carbon emissions. But of course, here it depends again, what is your assumption for the carbon price that you take into account? That would change this calculation, of course. Okay, that's another case in a similar way for mangrove restoration. And yeah, as you can see here, the benefit of that, the option in the middle. So you plant mangroves combined with ecotourism and local stewardship is the one that fares best. And yeah, this helps to the purpose why I'm showing this is how different kind of like management scenarios can be compared and integrate it into such kind of more broader multi-value assessment. Then, of course, we have the issue of that for some investments into nature, the benefits evolve over time. So we have conservation benefits and ecosystem service provision evolving over longer time horizons, and that the short-term benefit of deforestation often is making the case that the short-term investment into ecosystem destruction or exploitation often dominates the narrative. And there's, McCartney called this breaking the tragedy of the horizon. So how can we achieve that the long-term benefits of nature conservation and sustainability in general are more taken into account when it comes to cost-benefit analysis? And of course, that's the question of how you determine the net present value and what interest rate, discount rate you are choosing. And this is just an example to highlight, okay, what's the difference between different discount rates? If you look into 50 years into the future, if we have a discount rate of 0, 1 million today is also worth or 1 million in 50 years is worth for us 1 million also today. But if we assume a discount rate, meaning that we value it less, what happens in 50 years time? If that discount rate is at 4%, then the value of 1 million in 50 years is only 140,000 for us today. And this has implications because many projects, or all projects, of course, do a net present value, meaning analysis, meaning what is the value, how does the value evolve over time, and what's the meaning of that value to us today. And typical infrastructure projects have a discount rate of more than 10%, or maybe 8%. So it's definitely higher than those depicted here. Of course, means also that maybe infrastructure has a shorter lifetime. But since nature is existing and also if you keep it intact, also existing in the future and also providing those ecosystem services into the future for future generations, it should really be also the question of whether we should, apply different discount rates for valuing nature. So we could ask ourselves the question, should the future benefit of public goods be discounted, of in particular biodiversity and ecosystem services? If we think that future generations benefit the same from biodiversity and ecosystem services as we do today, and we think that our next generations are valuable to us, then we should kind of think, okay, what's the discount rate we should choose here? Maybe it could be a discount rate of 4%. It could be also if we say we want our children to have the same environment and same benefits, maybe you could even argue for a discount rate of 0%. But what you see from this little exercise is that these assumptions play a big role when it comes to cost-benefit analysis and what makes even the investment case. And what we learned from this experiment, it's called the marshmallow experiment, that actually people that are patient and wait, in this case, children were asked to wait for 15 minutes before eating the marshmallow. If they managed to wait 15 minutes, and they didn't eat the marshmallow, they would get another one. They would have 2 marshmallows in 15 minutes time. And it was a struggle for the children. Some didn't uh, achieve to wait long enough, so they were eating it straight away. Others were having a really hard time, but achieved to wait 15 minutes and have two marshmallows. And actually, they found that the people that are more patient and can uh, are more forward-looking are usually those that are more successful and live a more healthy life because yeah, they can yeah take the benefit that they know can be achieved in the future already into account into their decision making today. So, but our economy is of course running more on the short term destruction and extraction of resources. So there's a question, isn't investing into nature also more a question of human psychology? So for a better relationship with nature, perhaps we need more long-term thinking, which enables also long-term gains over short-term revenues. And of course, as many know, economy and investing and this has a lot to do with psychology, of course. Yeah, now we have around 15 minutes left. We come to the other part of the focus of the double materiality, and that's on avoiding impacts. So just have in mind again the impact mitigation hierarchy, which kind of follows the approach of avoiding impacts in the first place, then minimize, then restore, and then offset if you cannot restore, minimize, or avoid. And yeah, you can have a business case for avoiding and minimizing impacts. That will be also the focus now on the next steps. Earlier, you have seen the case for restoring ecosystems and how to integrate ecosystem services. And of course, we can also apply restoration activities in terms of offsetting. So if you have an impact on a certain site, you can then maybe help restore another site and yeah, use that as an offset for your impacts. But basically, the logic here is you have a resource use, and then this is generating certain outcomes and effects, meaning impacts, and these can be valued also in monetary terms. Um, and this is the impact logic of the social cost of carbon that I described earlier. Here it means different energy users, resource users have greenhouse gas emissions that have implications for the environment. It can have impacts on human health, on yeah, water resources, damages to the environment around the globe. So you see the flow of input, output, outcomes, and impacts. And this is the impact pathway of CO2 emissions. And based on these links, there are global models that estimate the damage of CO2 emissions. And of course, models give a range of outcomes. And generally agreed now is social cost of carbon between 240 US dollars, and the German Environment Agency is actually proposing 300 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent as a social cost of carbon. So that means if you're investing into an activity that creates carbon emissions and you want to account for your environmental damage, then you would have to choose one of those. You could also choose maybe from the voluntary carbon market the 10 US dollar per ton of CO2, but that then would raise questions whether you are following um, established accounting rules. And generally, for impact accounting, it's now accepted to actually use the social cost of carbon. And if you do this, this can have real implications for your investment case. If you account, for example, for a palm oil forest development, the carbon emissions related to it and multiplied by the social cost of carbon, this could hugely change the investment case, giving an upside to actually protecting the forest. And maybe you would maybe not invest into the high CO2 emitting developments, but maybe there are options of more sustainable management options of palm oil production that would then be preferred if you integrate these damage costs into the investment strategy. Similar to this, one can also follow the land use change impact pathway. On the left, you see raw materials that are harvested, for example, or construction sites that have land use footprint, but also restoration activities that contribute to enhancement of ecosystems also have a footprint in terms of positive footprint. And this has an implications of what ecosystem services are delivered. So the outcome of ecosystem services is the impact that is being created. So if you have a construction site that completely erases the ecosystem, then you lose all the ecosystem services and their values. This you can turn into monetary values and integrate into your investment case. Similarly, when you do ecological restoration activities, you can integrate all the ecosystem service values that you are generating. There's a global database of value factors for impact drivers. This was now the example for greenhouse gas emissions and land use, but there's also interim methodology available for air pollution, waste, water pollution, and yeah, these are, again, as mentioned earlier, monetary valuation involves also many assumptions. So value factors based also on these assumptions, and that means value factors are also generalized indication of monetary impacts that can help to give orientation. But one should be aware of that it's also a certain amount of assumptions causing also that these values have a certain range. Can be higher, it can be also lower for a particular case. And this is then how this is translated from the measurement of the direct units in physical terms, using valuation factors, turning them into monetary values. And this can then translate it into an impact statement. Either you can do it for a company on the balance sheet, or you can also do it for an investment case. This is an example from the peatland use in Germany. Maybe you remember it from the last time. So when looking at all the benefits, so the blue bars on above the line, the positive benefits that farmers gain in terms of subsidies, but also the direct income from the land use, but then subtracting the CO2 emissions, maybe also influence on water quality, negative influence on water quality, then the whole investment case might turn around. And as we in Europe have an increase in CO2 pricing that is taking hold, so for example in Denmark, they are including this now also for agricultural sector, this can really change also your investment case. I wanted to go into the science-based target network information, but I think I'm going to skip this and we'll go to the investment case. It's just that you're aware of the science-based targets network. It provides targets for the climate targets, but also for targets related to biodiversity and related to freshwater use and for land. And it helps to give guidance to prioritize sites for where to start first with setting targets on reducing land use and water use footprint. And the discussion of baseline, basically meaning you're comparing a state from as business as usual scenario to a scenario where you help achieve to reduce the impacts on land and water use. And this difference in impacts can, for example, be measured, of course, then can be quantified in biophysical terms, but can be also valued in monetary terms, as shown earlier, meaning your investment into more sustainable strategies, for example, also in circularity. So if you invest into circular water use cycles in a company, you can express the saved water withdrawal in monetary terms, and meaning reduced impact. And yeah, coming to the investment case, you all, or some of you have seen the case from New York. I use it again just to highlight some aspects of, okay, what was the problem statement here? There's excessive rainwater events leading to overspills of the drainage system. So there is a need of an upgrade of the drainage system. However, it's quite expensive to just build a new drainage system. So the solution, what is if we actually combine the existing drainage system with green infrastructure, meaning integrating green spaces into the streets that are specially designed to take up rainwater. So there's a specific role of ecosystems to play here. And then we have a target and a strategy. So we have a target 10% reduction of stormwater uh, through this green infrastructure. There's a strategy, there's a stormwater management plan, and this is the nature-based solution. Of course, it's also engineered in the sense of it's not just a hole and then some plants. It's specifically designed to the soil to take up the stormwater. And then also, of course, it adds to the, yeah, not only the beauty of the street, making it from gray more to green, but provides also other benefits that have been calculated as well. And yeah, using kind of the replacement cost method, saying like, well, we replace parts of the required infrastructure, drainage system expansion by green infrastructure. We actually have a saving there compared to the baseline assumption, the business as usual scenario with the gray infrastructure. And the cost savings here are 1.5 billion over a period of 20 years. And in addition to this, we get also multiple other co-benefits in terms of energy savings, CO2 uptake, air quality, also property values near those more green areas have increased. Yes, and actually the target has been overachieved. The green infrastructure reduces the drainage by 20%. And also, as you can see here, the long-term benefits are valued over the short-term results. So while with gray infrastructure, you might get, relatively speaking, short-term benefits. Of course, it takes time to build that gray infrastructure as well. But overall, with the increase in the green infrastructure, you get more benefits over the long term. Yeah, I hope this was informative and gave you different perspectives on how to measure and make the case for investments into nature. Unfortunately, I think we don't have much time for questions.
First of all, thank you very much, Johannes, and it was indeed very informative. Yes, we don't have so much time left anymore, but there are two questions in the chat. So one from Margot, it was to the MCA. Is there any existing and globally recognized methodologies or tools to perform MCA, for example, with guidance for searching for indicators, benchmark, provide the right weight to each parameter, etc.?
I'm not aware personally like of a standard, but it's just that maybe I don't know it. So I would recommend, and I will maybe also look it up myself, to see actually if there is um, certain standards that for MCA analysis. But I would assume, of course, they would serve different purposes. So depending on the purpose, the sector that you're investing in, different types of MCA analysis might be used. So it might be different between different users.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another question from Juliet. In these discussions, aren't there voices arising against the concept of putting a financial value to nature? For example, trying to solve biodiversity destruction with the very same tools, metric systems that contributed to destroy it.
Yes, definitely. And that's why I also included, of course, the multiple value discussion and the multi-criteria analysis to actually prevent this from happening. Um, but I think monetary valuation can be also eye-opening to stakeholders that only think in monetary terms. Um, but when communicating such values, one should always stress, okay, this is just a fraction of the values of the multiple values. There are other values as well that should be taken into account.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? I don't know, Guilherme, is it okay maybe to have 2 or 3 more minutes in case there are questions? Okay. So are there any questions? You can use the chat, or maybe it's faster now to just unmute yourself and ask if you want.
I mean, I can add that this multiple value perspective, I mean, I've been part also of this UN initiative, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, which looked intensively at this, aspect of economics of biodiversity and ecosystem service. And there it was stressed that the multiple value perspective is important, that it's not really one has to decide from case to case also when does it make sense to use a monetary perspective and when maybe other values and other metrics are maybe even more important. You could also have an investment case purely on the on the biophysical values that you get. So showing that water quality improves, and you give the biophysical values of the how much the water quality is improving, might for some investors be enough to say like, okay, if I'm a brewery, I know that the water quality will improve by X% in that particular indicator. They will maybe say, oh, that's fine, we do it. The investment into maintaining the ecosystem for maintaining water quality.
Okay. Are there any more questions? No. Okay, if not, some already have to leave. I see there are also some thank you in the chat. So yes, thank you very much, Johannes, for your great presentation, and to everyone for joining. And I think for the closing words, I hand back to Guylaine, but also from my side, before we end, I wish you all great and very relaxing holidays and a good end of the year. And it was really nice to have this online webinar series together with you. And I'm looking forward to also what's coming next. And yeah, thank you so much from my side. And I hand over to you, Guylaine.
Yes, thank you very much, Christine. I really want to thank you, Johannes, for this presentation. With this thematic and presentation, we are concluding our 2025 biodiversity training program. With the Frankfurt School, we really hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned a lot about biodiversity topics and nature finance. I wish you a wonderful holiday season. I hope you will be in family and that you can have some days for you too. And I look forward to seeing you in January to discuss about the programs that we are preparing and designing with Frankfurt School for you and for 2026. So thank you very much for joining us today. and we will be very happy to see you in January.
Thank you very much. I also
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed the course. So thank you also to all participants, and maybe more discussions next time for more interaction.
Sure. Thank
Thank
you
you,
very much.
everyone. See you next
Goodbye.
year. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye bye.